Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all the time. Puddles and I are in Evanston, Illinois, in the really lovely home of Margaret and Channing Philbrick. It's a beautiful, beautiful home.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for inviting us in.
Well, thank you for coming and listening to what I have to say.
It's great to see you. Margaret and I were in school many years ago.
Yes.
At Northwestern, graduate of Northwestern, and long-time Chicagoland trumpet freelancer.
Yes.
Studied with Chikowitz and Mr. Edelstein and Cleveland, and you are from Tulsa originally, and along the way you had some studies with Arnold Jacobs.
I did.
I'm wondering if you can tell us about that.
Well, I studied with Arnold Jacobs. After I finished my graduate work at Northwestern, I had one lesson towards the end of my time at Northwestern, and Mr. Chikowitz was okay with that. I didn't want to step on his toes because I had primarily come here to study with him.
Sure.
And then I continued to study with Jake, and it wasn't very frequent because the lessons were very high priced. But I should have been very grateful that he worked me in, because that was very difficult to do. But I don't remember having to work very hard at getting a lesson with him. So I had a few lessons into the fall that year, and then I went back to Tulsa and played the job that I had to leave from, and so we played that. And then after doing that, then I came back to Chicago and took another couple of lessons with him at that point too.
What do you remember from that initial lesson or group of lessons? What was it that you did? What did he do for you?
Oh, well, I wasn't going for a specific problem, as so many people do. I was going to learn as much as I possibly could in this expansive time that I had here to spend in Chicago.
Yeah.
Never expecting to stay for such a long time, but I did. And so the first lesson with him, we talked a lot about air, because that's what he was about. But he always, with Jake, it's air and music, wind and song, because that's what comes up immediately. My big concern that I was there with him to ask about and to work with was the fact that I was 5 feet tall and I weighed 100 pounds. And I was sitting in sections with 6'2" men who certainly had a lot more weight on them than that. And it just always concerned me that I wasn't going to be able to make the same phrases that they made, and that I would never be able to play as loud as they could play, and that it would just affect my musicianship. And so the first lesson I had with him, he got out all his toys and the medical air measuring devices that all look very impressive, and we did the measurement of my lungs, and he had me try, of course, several times, because it was maybe not less than expected, but he wanted, of course, to get the best reading that he could from me and give me a couple of shots at it. But I think I came up with about a 3.0, which was very funny, because he would say, "Oh, well, we have something in common," and he would tell me that about his medical history, and that he too had about a 3-liter lung capacity, and that he was playing the tuba, so I shouldn't have any worries at all.
No, so he's reassuring.
He is very reassuring. Oh, he's a very warm man, and he really did his best just with his tone and his approach to people to get the best out of you and get the best out of everyone. And so he's always very reassuring, even if you could have been really far out in left field, but he would have been reassuring, and and maybe brought you in a little closer with what would help you the most.
So he measured your lung capacity. You played for him in that first lesson or two, or
we did play, but for most of the first lesson, it was it was air, it was breath, it was mouthpiece buzzing, and production, and we talked a lot about singing, and I had studied with Edelstein previously to this, and so we had done a lot of singing with him, so that was kind of a continuation. And I did play because I was in the audition mode, looking for always the bigger and better job, And so, we did work with some excerpts, and that first lesson, of course, we didn't do that, but we just worked through probably a Rochu or something very lyrical.
In that first lesson
At
or
the
two?
very first lesson, yeah.
Okay, so you started, why don't you play something for me, and you maybe offered up the Rochu, and do you remember why he stopped you and had you sing or play the mouthpiece, or did he?
Well, I think as my concerns about making the phrase, because I wanted to really be able to, not have a conductor. We had just finished playing Parsifal, and have a conductor stop and say, "Could you do that phrase all in one breath?"
Right.
Which, of course, the answer was probably not.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my biggest concern that I was wanting to work with him over. And so we talked about the longer phrases and how perhaps I would not be making that the same way somebody with a 7-liter air capacity would be making, but about making it about the music and making the phrases so beautiful that the conductor would never think to ask for the whole thing in one breath. It would just never cross his mind that he would want to hear it any other way.
So his solution was to make your phrases so thoughtful that it wouldn't be. How could it be any different than that? It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was beautiful, and it conveyed the music, and the tone was beautiful, and why would I want anything else?
Were there you remember any specifics in terms of the getting to that point where the phrases were so beautiful? Did he talk to you about any particular aspects of phrasing, or putting a phrase together, or notes, or?
Golly, probably. No, I think that was kind of where the singing your music came in, and the high points of the phrases and continuing the phrase to the phrase ending, to where it really sounded complete, and it would hide the breath before your next phrase so that no one would really even know you were playing.
So making your phrases really mimic just normal patterns of speech.
I think so.
Just
very much.
What sounds normal.
Right. And the human ear hears what the human ear hears, and it's how we speak, and it's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
So making our music sound like our speech is
What did
similar.
you get out of the mouthpiece buzzing? Had you been exposed to that? Did Mr. Chikowitz?
Always.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. From day one. Mouthpiece buzzing. It was all about buzzing music and listening to articulation. When you got past the the wind part and getting into the music part, how are the articulations. But he talked a lot about the mouthpiece buzzing and how when he was in the hospital, that was all he was allowed to do, was buzz his mouthpiece. I think he was a very sickly child.
Yeah.
And so he was talking about how the music, and you buzz it, and then you could come back and really not have lost a whole lot by only buzzing your mouthpiece. I think he was in the hospital for maybe 6 months or something.
A long time. Yeah, the kidney
and so,
disorder. Yeah.
Right. And so, he encouraged a lot of that. And of course, you can do it when you're driving your car or any chance you get. And certainly, perhaps I was already doing that. I was, thinking back to, I studied with Chikowitz, I studied with Edelstein, I studied with Jake, and they're all from the same tradition. And, who heard what first. And I certainly know that the mouthpiece buzzing in the song was not unfamiliar. So I'm not sure how long I'd been doing that, or if it was something that was fairly new. I came from kind of a Chikowitz-inspired teacher, in
Tulsa.
In Tulsa, and I think Chikowitz and Jake, were so much on the same page. I think you had mentioned Chikowitz had studied with Jake.
Right.
Then, of course, sitting in that wonderful brass section together at the symphony, and I think everybody learning from each other as they play, and the conversations with words or without words that must be happening between these guys.
Sure.
So it's either it's new or it's being reinforced because you've heard it from one of the other guys, and it's just a wonderful process.
Margaret, did Mr. Jacobs talk to you about the physiological ramifications in terms of you having 3 liters versus somebody who else might have 5 or 6 liters? Some people get by on half a breath, especially trumpeters. I think it's easier for them to make a phrase if they have 6 liters of air and they only take in 3. But with you, with a 3 liter,
Yeah, no, it's all about the full breath, at least for me. But getting in a full breath takes a little more time than getting in on half a breath. And so there was some talk about, if you're finishing the piece, if you're finishing a phrase, that maybe a half breath would just do it. But I would never take the half breath, because that was the one thing I was always very nervous about, running out of air and not being able to make that phrase, which would sound very silly. If you couldn't even make that little bit, and the conductor would definitely call you on something like that.
Sure. I remember him talking about you want to protect the ends of your phrases,
Right.
which certainly from a conceptual standpoint, that was important, but also from a breath standpoint, making sure that you had adequate air to really support that sound that you were conceiving.
Yes.
So that would be, you would really need to make sure that you took your full breath all the time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And were you? It seemed like you were conscious of this before you went to his studio, of just sitting in a trumpet section with other people who had more air than you.
Well, right, and then we were in the audition mode at that point, and I did well on some auditions, but as the auditions, as the orchestras got better that you were auditioning for, then the competition got better, and generally it was people who used their air extremely well and weren't going on the half breath. So it was kind of how am I going to compete against this? So it was kind of a competition thing, which is a shame that music is competitive, but I guess that's how we get the best product.
Earlier you mentioned articulation. What do you remember about that specifically? What was he working on, or with you to get articulations?
For articulations, it was mostly through mouthpiece buzzing, and having a clean, clear articulation, and then an immediacy of sound, tone, so that you had the articulation, and then the tone is part of the articulation almost, so that people are not going, wow, they tongued that well. They didn't want to hear that. It was all about the sound and how the sound could, sparkle right off the attack. So that was mostly where we talked about that.
Was there? Did you present yourself maybe using a over articulation? Really emphasized consonant?
Probably on accented things that I was trying to make sound much louder, because if you accent something very well, then of course it sounds like the volume is louder.
Yeah.
And that was always, if I'm playing this part, I don't want to be perceived as being weak, and so I will attack it a little bit stronger and with the articulations, so that the sound is out there, and I can conserve my air. If that's what you want to call it, I can stretch my air, conserve my air for a little bit longer phrasing.
So by having a really large, more or less accented articulation, but then not so much follow through with the tone past the articulation?
Oh, well,
what you mean,
no. It's just, if you're playing a nice mezzo forte phrase and you want to make it sound forte, you can articulate it a little bit stronger.
Gotcha.
And so we're working on just the clean, clear articulation. And so I did articulate a little heavily. And so, he was trying to get rid of the articulation sound, so that you had the flow immediately.
Immediacy of sound, sound. I remember him talking about quite a bit, blow from the lips. You got to get air to the lips, and getting air to the tongue doesn't give you tone. Getting air to the lips does. But the small T, was that part of the small, whatever consonant you might have been using?
Right.
With the larger vowel?
A T, and then and what I consider to be an O sound, so that your oral cavity was as large as possible, and then you would get your best tone quality that way, with and the airflow, and it'd be all about the tone. And so we did work on the articulation, getting it and getting the tone, the shape of the mouth, the toe, just immediately, so that you had music as opposed to just tonguing. Do
you feel like he understood you as a trumpeter, even though he wasn't really he played bugle in his school days, you know, and he was a Boy Scout bugler for his troop back when he was a
I
youth.
suspect sitting down the section from Herseth all those years, and you know, of course, with Chickowitz and Scarlett and everybody else in the section, that that he understood trumpet players quite well.
Okay. Yeah, so there wasn't any. Did you ever work on like piccolo trumpet with him?
No, my lessons weren't that extensive with him.
Okay.
Things changed, and I think he moved over to Northwestern maybe after these lessons, and he was very busy. So it became increasingly difficult to have lessons with him, but
Okay.
my scope was changing as to what I wanted to accomplish.
So strictly on the larger trumpets
Right.
with
yes.
Jacobs.
Yeah. So it was more about the technique and the style, which is really what our initial discussions were about, what I wanted to accomplish.
Yeah.
Coming here. Not that I would have said, no, let's not work on that, but that's just not where we went.
And it seems like it worked out well for you. I mean, do you feel like those lessons were beneficial?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, indeed. And they reinforced a lot of what I had learned and gave me new things to think about, and erased a lot of the paranoias I was building within myself. You know, the anxiety, I guess you would call it, of, you know, good golly, how am I ever going to work my way through this, and how am I going to make these phrases, you know. And so having the anxiety of him telling me that it was really all about the music,
Mm-hmm.
and making the phrases as beautiful as possible, even if maybe there was one more than everybody else, was okay.
Margaret, I know that you've had extensive experience working with students in a large group setting. How do you manage to take Jacobs pedagogy, which is really largely individually based, it's one-on-one? You know, how do you make that work in a large group setting, or does it work in a large group setting?
Well, there, regardless of the instrument, in the group lessons that I have taught, where, you know, there are certainly more than one player there, we always, you know, air is essential to every wind player, of course, and so you can take the Jake Ped and, you know, apply it to a large group so that, you know, we're all thinking about the air and the music and the song and the articulation and the tone quality formation with syllables. You can, you know, especially with younger children, you can get them off on the right foot by talking about breathing, you know, and certainly we're not talking about air capacity and you know, measuring their lung space and
sure.
lung capacity.
Right.
But you are talking about, you know, taking the big breath and feeling how that is, and you know, making sure that the air production happens right, you know, your airflow in and out, and then talking about the music, you know, we're not just playing notes, we're playing music, and really gearing them off on the right foot to having these wonderful thoughts about their playing and about the music they're producing, so that they don't just go through, you know, the technical checklist in their heads and then get so wound up that they can't play.
Right.
Which happens so often in, you know, the middle school, high school setting, that, you know, they hear what they want to do and they assume it's a technical thing that they can just sit down and hammer out,
Mm-hmm.
when it's really much more base than that, where you just, you know, it's the air in, it's the air out.
So it's simple. Keep it simple, but then
Right.
make music the priority. Sounds like
Right.
what you and do they receive that well generally, or?
They do. Does do 100% of the people in a group
right.
lesson get it? No, probably not. But there's so many ways to teach in a group setting,
Yeah.
and you know, everybody can work on it together, and then individually you can show each other, or in pairs. You know, everybody can stand up and play, or sit down and play if they'd like,
Right.
and then you get a chance to, maybe not one-on-one, but a little one-on-one with them in that order.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets all the other listeners involved to saying, yeah, well, what if you tried this? And so it's a nice technique to use in a large group.
Yeah. And is this with brass players only, or do you have a mix of other instrumentalists?
There's a mix of other instruments.
Okay.
It works, across the board, as I think you've come to discover as you've interviewed,
Yeah.
Who studied with Jake, because it is all, it's just basic formation of how to play a wind instrument.
And what to think about.
And what to think about and
Right.
what not to think about.
I remember with Mr. Jacobs, sometimes it would be he would be talking about really, as you've mentioned already, really focusing on the music. But as you focus in on the music, one of the benefits is there's not then really enough room in your thinking to be concerned with other peripheral things. Do you remember anything about your time with him about that?
Discussions about that,
Yeah.
right? Well, the discussion was all of your attention and focus should be on the music, and how you want to present the music and what your song is, and so there wasn't room for the the audition anxiety of oh my God, how else is everybody going to play today, and so that you could really just focus on yourself and being the best that you can be that day, because in an audition you don't know what they're listening for. So why play that game?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're focusing on that kind of musical thought, then there really isn't room for all the extraneous nonsense to come in.
Yeah, if you're really focusing on the music, and I mean it's a tremendous amount of training of the brain and personal mind control to put your thoughts really in there,
Mm-hmm.
not only in the audition itself, but as in the green room, in the cattle call room,
Mm-hmm.
and even as you're driving to the audition, just to keep your
Right.
thoughts focused on the music, so you don't have that sense of nervousness coming in.
True.
It really is it's an important thing. But if you focus on the music, there isn't that room
No.
for those
no.
thoughts.
Yeah, we hope there isn't room for those thoughts.
Yeah.
And so we battle to keep them out, and this is a terrific battleground to focus on. Is, how is my music going to be today?
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Margaret,
Thank you,
for
Michael.
inviting us in. And Puddles, as always, has a gift to
like
present
Puddles.
you.
All
Genuine
right.
Tuba People TV water bottle.
Lovely. Thank you so much, sir. It's
You're very welcome.
good to catch up with you.
Thanks again for playing at my wedding
Absolutely.
those many years ago.
That was great.
I
It was
appreciate
a
it.
wonderful day.
And I guess we'd like to say, and now back to you.